Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my privilege to rise today to speak on behalf of the government on Bill C-597, and particularly at this time when all members of this House are wearing the poppy. I think it's important for us to debate Remembrance Day, its role in our country, and how we should remember, both here in our nation's parliament, but in the cenotaphs scattered throughout the hundreds, if not thousands, of small towns and cities across the country as an act of remembrance. So I'd like to thank the member for Scarborough Southwest for bringing this debate to the House today. And as he knows, the government supports the intention of this bill with some amendments that we have spoken with the member on throughout the process. And I would like to thank him for sharing his personal reflections on what Remembrance Day means to his family, and indeed he showed this House that the events of a few weeks ago in this city still reverberate deeply within the nation and with the members of this House. And it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, because we're debating Remembrance Day in a very important solemn day for our country that actually wasn't Remembrance Day when it first came to Canada. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in 1919 it was referred to as Armistice Day because it was the year following the important armistice to end the Great War, where the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month would be commemorated to honor the dead from that Great War, Mr. Speaker, and to respect the peace that was secured through the sacrifice of many. There have been 1.5 million Canadians who've heeded the call of service over our history as a nation. So it's not only a time where remembrance can be given to the fallen, but respect for the service of those in the past and present can be honored. And so it was Armistice Day for our young country, Mr. Speaker, that was honored each November. Interestingly, and I'm sure the honourable member knows this from his research on his bill, for the first decade or so, it wasn't even formally recognized on November 11th. It was actually the first Monday of the week that November 11th fell. And it might be interesting to members of this House, Mr. Speaker, to know that it was an act by a member of Parliament from British Columbia in 1931 that actually solidified November 11th as the day that would be marked and changed the name from Armistice Day to Remembrance Day that we know today. And that was an interesting period, Mr. Speaker, the first decade or so of remembrance for a young nation, because within that first decade, the guardians of Remembrance Day were also born. In 1925, when the Royal Canadian Legion was created, Mr. Speaker, bringing together a number of fraternal and service organizations with many veterans from the Great War. They came together. And then in this House, the following year, Mr. Speaker, 1926, an Act of Parliament was granted to recognize the important role the Royal Canadian Legion played then and plays now on remembrance and care for our veterans, Mr. Speaker. To this day, there remains 1,100 veteran service officers who, as their core principle for the branch they serve, is to serve the veteran community. And I know the veteran service officer in my branch, on an individual basis, has helped over 500 veterans or their partner access benefits. Most Canadians should know that when they support the Poppy Drive in their towns and cities across the country, they're supporting the work of our Legion veteran service officers, Mr. Speaker, because the proceeds from the Poppy Fund are dedicated to veteran care in the community and across the country. So I'd like to thank the Legion for its important role for our veterans and making sure that Remembrance Day happens. I know I'll be this week, Mr. Speaker, at Remembrance Day services at 2 of the small cenotaphs in hamlets in my community. There would be no service in those small hamlet cenotaphs were it not for Branch 178 of the Royal Canadian Legion, who make sure that every cenotaph that bears the name of a fallen for Canada has a proper ceremony and proper mark of remembrance. Mr. Speaker, a few years after, 8 years in fact, in 1939, after Remembrance Day as we now know it was brought forward by this federal House, our National War Memorial was unveiled. And it was struck 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, attacked for what it represents to our country. And we're all still shaken with the death of Corporal Nathan Cirillo, who was performing an honorary guard there to show respect for the fallen commemorated by that memorial and by the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And there's 22 figures that adorn our National War Memorial that represents the commitment of Canada as a young nation to the Great War and then subsequently to the wars that followed, Mr. Speaker. And I think everyone in this House was touched in the days following the attacks in Ottawa by the Bruce McKinnon cartoon that showed those historical figures tending to the new fallen, Corporal Cirillo. Canadians continue to commemorate, Mr. Speaker. Just this week in Whitby, I attended Wounded Warriors Canada opening of the Park of Reflection, which is to remember the fallen from Afghanistan and those that traveled the Highway of Heroes, Mr. Speaker, and to allow veterans a place of solace for their own recovery. So I'd like to thank Scott Maxwell, Phil Ralph, Wounded Warriors Canada for keeping these memories alive. Chorus Entertainment, Gary Minerva and Joel Watson, a lawyer from Toronto, are making sure that broadcasters on November 11th commemorate the 2 minutes of silence at 11 o'clock on TV broadcasts if they're not already playing the national ceremony, Mr. Speaker. So it's tremendous to see the spirit of Remembrance Day from 1931 to today, and what I think my honourable colleague wants to recognize through this bill. Canadians are showing their own ways across the country of keeping this important date as an important part of their life and remembering the service and sacrifice of our men and women. So the specifics of the bill, Mr. Speaker, before this House really corrects a drafting oversight from the 1970s, when the Holidays Act treated Remembrance Day slightly different than it treated Victoria Day and Dominion Day, now Canada Day, Mr. Speaker. So I'm proud that I think most members of this House, it seems, will support the member from Scarborough Southwest in rectifying this to make sure that Remembrance Day is treated in the same way as a federal holiday as those other important days to our country, Mr. Speaker. The other item from his bill, Mr. Speaker, I think he has recognized in our discussions that the flag on our Peace Tower is normally lowered to half-mast on Remembrance Day as part of our act of national commemoration. So in some ways, a lot of the spirit behind his bill, some is being exercised already, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to see that the House will rectify this omission from the 1970s and from this Act. And what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, and the member addressed this in his remarks to the House, is across the country there are 6 provinces and 3 territories who also grant statutory recognition to Remembrance Day on a provincial level. So federally, Mr. Speaker, it's already a statutory holiday for federal employees within federal jurisdiction. And 6 provinces have extended that at the provincial level. And it seems like the member's hoping that the remaining provinces might take this rectifying of the language on a federal level and recognition of the importance of Remembrance Day to our country as an opportunity to visit their decisions on a provincial level, Mr. Speaker. And if that's the case, I think it's a good exercise. In my time in uniform serving this country, Mr. Speaker, I had the benefit of living in 2 different provinces where it was handled in different ways. And while I was in Nova Scotia, serving with 423 and 406 Squadron, that province had a provincial holiday as well. And you saw larger numbers at the cenotaphs, and that's good. Whereas in Ontario, it was not a provincial holiday. There is merit, as he recognized, to the argument that it is good to have students in school learning about this process. And I know the Ontario legislature visited this issue in the late 1990s and decided not to proceed provincially with a statutory holiday for this very reason, so that they knew that students would be learning about Remembrance Day within the school, Mr. Speaker. But I think with this effort that C597 represents, this will make it clear where the federal government is with respect to the importance of Remembrance Day to our country, and give the provinces the opportunity to revisit whether they want to make it a statutory holiday as well, Mr. Speaker. At this time of year, if anything, I hope that this bill reminds Canadians that they need to wear a poppy, they need to get to a cenotaph, and make sure that we remember the people that fell for our country and hold the significance of the date dear to our hearts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.